Hello, everyone. Today we'd be discussing the designing a study question. Now, this question where we expected to design a study or plan up a study, we get this question in paper 4. Paper 4, section B. This section is of 24 marks. And if we talk about the significance of this particular question, our paper, as you all must be aware, is of 60 marks. So simple calculation, this turns out to be 40% of your total marks from paper 4. Now, it is pretty essential that you all understand first how this question is attempted, what the requirements of this question are, and then you start practicing it. Of course, this particular question requires a lot more of practice as compared to other questions. Now, when we speak about this designing a study question, I'd like to use the question from our specimen paper to be able to help you understand this. This is the question that I'm referring to. But before we get started with this, there are a couple of general guidelines, basic guidelines that I'd want everyone to keep in mind to begin with. Now, when we speak about this question in section B, we get a choice over here. Now, there are 4 different specialist options that we have that are part of a syllabus. We have clinical psychology, we have clinical psychology, we have health psychology, we have organizational psychology, and we have consumer behavior. Now, in this question, for this question rather, you get a choice out of these 4 different specialist choice questions. You're expected to attempt any one. However, as we all know that typically students study 2 components. In our case, we've studied clinical psychology and we would be studying health psychology ahead. So in other words, you get a choice in this question for this question where it's on your discretion if you want to attempt this designing a study question from clinical psychology or you want to attempt this from health psychology. Number 1, we have choice over here. So as this says in section B, candidates get a choice of attempting the designing a study question from the 4 specialist options. Read questions for both the components that you've studied. So by the time we're done with our syllabus, you'd be in a position to understand questions from health psychology as well. So it's highly advised that you read these questions thoroughly, both from clinical and health psychology, before you decide on what particular question to attempt. Number 1. Number 2, to be able to attempt this question, you all need to thoroughly understand your research methodology. You all need to be aware of the different research methods that are part of your syllabus. And if we speak about these different research methods, we have experiments. So we have experiments. We have self-report measures. We have case studies. Just drag this here. We have observations. We have correlations. And we have longitudinal studies. So these 6 different research methods that we have that are part of a syllabus, I'd strongly advise you all to read through all 6 of them again and know well how to apply these, because this particular question, that is the designing a study question, heavily relies on your grip on research methodology. So to be able to attempt this question, students need to have a thorough understanding and grip of the syllabus content. That is, of course, needs to be there, as well as research methods that have been studied in AS. Now, what I'd want to advise you all at this point is you should all list down at least 3 to 4 characteristics for each of these research methods, at least 3 to 4 characteristics for each of these methods. These characteristics that you'd list down, you learn them and then learn how to apply them as well as you apply them in paper 2 in AS. Now, this particular question tests on your application skills, the extent to which you can apply the knowledge you've gained from research methodology and apply the knowledge you've gained from the specialist option that you've studied. Either it could be either clinical or health psychology. Now, there are 6 research methods taught in AS. You should know at least 3 to 4 characteristics for each. I just show you now these characteristics. I have them listed down. You might as well put that to use. Here you are. So you might as well pause this video here and write down these research, the characteristics of these 6 different research methods that are part of a syllabus, so that they stand so that you could learn how to apply them as well. Now, if we take this ahead, we on this third point, there are 6 research methods that are taught in AS. You should know at least 3 to 4 characteristics for each. Over here, I believe we have some 5 characteristics mentioned for each. It would be good if you learn all 5 of them. If not, make sure you're learning at least 3 to 4 of them. Taking this ahead, this designing a study question is divided into 3 parts. This is divided into 3 parts, namely question A, question B, and question C respectively, where question A is worth 10 marks, question B is worth 8 marks, and question C is worth 6 marks. If you add all of these together, this would make 24 marks in total. And like I said earlier, 24 marks, or in other words, this makes 40% of your entire paper 4, which is quite a lot. Now, we discuss these one by one. To begin with, the first question, the 10-mark question here. In part A of the question, candidate is asked to design or plan a study. The research method to be used while designing the study is usually mentioned, not necessarily. This is usually mentioned by the examiner. If we have a look at the questions from the specimen paper, we'd see that the examiner has specified what particular research method to use. However, we have had questions in the past where the examiner has simply asked you to design a study without referring to any particular research method. In that case, if that happens, it's on your discretion totally. You choose what particular research method you would want to use. Now, from 2024 onwards, additionally, this is something that is new, which did not used to happen before. So from 2024 onwards, the examiner would specify any 2 features. Yeah, the examiner would specify any 2 features to be added to your planned study. Focus on these 2 specific features. I just show them to you as well, because the C question, that is a 6-mark question, would ask questions related to these specific features. Now, what happens is the examiner asks you to add a couple of features. They specifically asks you to add 2 features. If we have a look at the specimen paper, we see that the examiner has asked to include sampling technique, a directional or a non-directional hypothesis, interviewing techniques, question format, etc. Could be anything else as well. Now, this was part A. Okay. Moving on towards part B here. For part B, expect the same question always. The question starts like this: for one piece of psychological knowledge on which your plan is based, describe the psychological knowledge. Or this happens to be a 4-mark question where it is essential that you have a thorough understanding of your syllabus, because you'd have to identify what particular part of the syllabus has been used for this particular question. Now, for this, if we talk about the specimen paper question that I plan on discussing ahead, in that question, you have been asked to write down about the treatments. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was the biochemical treatment. So the biological treatments for schizophrenia. See, you will only be able to identify this if you have a thorough understanding of the syllabus, if you're sure about what all your syllabus contains. That is only when you'd be able to identify what particular part of the syllabus is the examiner referring to. One. Number two, this question, the second part of B question is linked to the first part. Explain how you use these two features of the psychological knowledge to plan your study. Now, they asked you to identify and write down about the psychological knowledge on which this question is based. And then you've been asked to explain how you've used those two features while planning up your own study. So the psychological knowledge on which this designing a study or planning a study question is based, number one, you should be able to identify from what particular part of the syllabus has this been picked from. In this part, you simply summarize this. I'll tell you why. I'll tell you how. And however, for the second part, this part, you're expected to provide an explanation through two different features. Remember, my dear, this is a 4-mark question. They're asking you about two features. So feature number one, and then the second feature, right? So you'd be expected to write down worth 2 marks each. You'd have to write down how through your study you have put that particular piece of psychological knowledge to use here. This was part B. Moving on towards part C here. In part C, expect 3 short questions. Remember when I had said this is a 6-mark question divided into 3 questions of 2 marks each. These questions are based on 2 specified features that the examiner had mentioned in part A. This is what we're talking about. These 2 features, right? Yeah, these 2 features. Could be any 2 of them. Now, taking this ahead, this question that you all see in front of you, this is been picked from the specimen paper. Now, if you have a look at this says section B, answer 1 question from this section. Like I said, you have 4 different specialist options. You have clinical psychology, you have consumer behavior, you have health psychology, and you have organizational psychology. Out of these 4 different specialist options, you get a choice to attempt any 1 question from here. So answer 1 question from this section. Let's read the question thoroughly first. We'll read the question thoroughly first. While reading the question, we need to focus specifically on this part because this is again related to this here, right? Now, schizophrenia, there we go. We identified that this is from unit 1. That is the first chapter from clinical psychology. Schizophrenia can be treated biochemically with drugs. Schizophrenia can be treated biochemically with drugs such as antipsychotics, but they're not always effective. So let's understand the question, the statement first. The statement over here says schizophrenia can be treated biochemically with drugs, right? You could use biochemicals, you could use drugs or medicines such as antipsychotics to treat schizophrenia. However, the examiner additionally puts it, but they're not always effective, right? Once you've understood the statement, move on and let's have a look at what the question away demands. Plan an experiment. Remember, I had said typically the examiner specifies what particular research method to use. Now, in this case, the examiner has mentioned that the examiner wants you to write down to plan up a study through an experiment, Remember, when we talk about an experiment, the first thing that should come into your mind are the features or the characteristics of an experiment that I had shown you. For instance, when we talk about an experiment, we know that an experiment has to have an IV and a DV. We know that we need to be sure about the type of experiment we're using. We need to know what controls have we used over here. We need to write down what particular experimental design is being used. We need to write down about as you all would be aware, experiment is not a data collection technique. Even if you're conducting an experiment, you need to have a particular data collection technique that you'd use, data collection technique. Now, you could collect your data either through questionnaires or you could collect your data either through interviews or through observation. or any other method, right? So having a look at what the question over here demands, the question says, plan an experiment to investigate the effectiveness of antipsychotic drugs to treat schizophrenia. You're expected to plan an experiment where you would be investigating how effective antipsychotic drugs are to be able to treat schizophrenia. Your plan must include details about these are the two specific features. So while you're planning this experiment, you need to make a point that you include details. They're not asking you to superficially mention them. They're expecting you to write details. Your plan must include details about the sampling technique you've used. It should include details on the directional or non-directional hypothesis. You might as well uh, mention the hypothesis that you're using. Be specific if it's a directional or a non-directional hypothesis. So this is worth 10 marks. We'd talk about now this particular question. This is marked through different levels. So you have different levels. We'd talk about level 5 towards the end. That is when you're scoring anywhere between 9 to 10 marks. So this was part A, 9A, okay? Now moving on towards part B, where I had said the question always remains the same. For one piece of psychological knowledge on which your plan is based, describe the psychological knowledge. They're asking to describe the psychological knowledge. What sort of psychological knowledge are we referring to over here? This is what the examiner is referring to. I'll show it to you through the marking scheme as well. This is what they expect you to write, all right? Now, or rather, I might as well show you how this is marked too. So see, describe the psychological knowledge. Content from the syllabus. Biochemical treatments include typical and atypical antipsychotics. The description, the descriptive part over here, remember the question has asked you to describe, and this is worth 4 marks. So you might as well describe it well, okay? So there are first generation antipsychotics. They work as a chemical Koch example, chlorpromazine. Second generation, there are second generation antipsychotics too that are atypical antipsychotics. They work by blocking dopamine receptors and had fewer side effects. There was this third generation antipsychotics too. Aripiprazole candidates are likely to have two conditions: antipsychotic experimental group and control group, either a placebo or a typical antipsychotic. Now, when you asked to describe this, because this is a 4 mark question, I'd suggest you write at least 4 specific points related to that particular part of the syllabus. And for this, like I'd mentioned, you need to be good enough with the syllabus so that you identify what particular part of the syllabus is this question from, and you're able to write it down in detail. So write down at least 4 points. If you know more, you might as well write 5 to 6 points, but make sure you're writing it in a paragraph. Now, what is the marking criteria here? The knowledge is appropriate, relevant points are correctly described in good detail. So let's just say there is, let's just keep these 3 points as a criteria. If we want to score a 4 on 4 over here, remember, we are expected to write down or provide the psychological knowledge that is appropriate, it is relevant, and you've correctly described it along with detail, right? Now, you might as well read the other marking levels as well so that you have an idea as to how you'd be graded. I'd like to reiterate, 4 mark question, write down at least 4 points. It would be better if you're able to put 5 to 6 points as well, just to be safe. Now, moving on towards the next question, I'll show you the question from the question paper first, and then we'd move on, then we'd come back to the marking scheme too. Now, this particular question that we have over here, what does this say? This is the question. Explain how you used 2 features of the psychological knowledge to plan your experiment. Now, 2 features from the psychological knowledge you provided. This was the psychological knowledge you were expected to provide, right? any two features from here, any two features that you pick up, right? You need to explain them. Do not miss on this first, what word do we use for this? The command word, right? The examiner refers to this as the command word. Do not miss on this command word. If they're asking you to describe, you describe. If they're asking you to explain, you explain, right? Now, this is a 4-mark question again that says explain how you used two features of the psychological knowledge to plan your experiment. Two features from the psychological knowledge to plan your experiment, right? Pick on the keywords, right? Make sure you are familiar with the questions that you'd get in your CIs. This would help you attempt attempt the question in the CIs more confidently. So having a look at this, this says candidates should explain how the psychological knowledge described in part B, one has informed their plan in A. In other words, in a nutshell, the psychological knowledge that you provided over here, this part, right? The psychological knowledge that you provided over here, how did you use this while planning up your own experiment, right? Now, how do we score? How do we score a 4 on 4 over here, right? Because there are two features. For the first feature, we expected to write worth 2 marks. For the second feature, we are again expected to write worth 2 marks. So for these 2 marks, let's see what all is expected from us. Now, provide a suitable answer that identifies a feature and explains how the feature was used, expanded or modified to make it appropriate to the plan. The knowledge has, just underline this, the knowledge has clearly been applied to the plan. So the knowledge from here, how is it that you have use this knowledge that you have to plan up an experiment in this case, or to plan up a study, right? So suitable answer that identifies a feature and explains how the feature was used. So let's just say you're getting the first mark for identification of feature. And you're getting the second mark for explanation as to how it has been used in the plan, explanation of how it has been used in the plan. Okay, now I hope you have understood this well. So you write a point in a paragraph. I mean, you write a feature, you explain that feature, you explain how you have used that particular feature in your plan study. Put it up in a paragraph, leave a line, and then start with the second feature, right? I strongly advise students to write their answers in block paragraph when you're leaving a line after you're done with a paragraph before you start the second one. Now, this brings in clarity for the examiner. This brings in clarity for the examiner, and the examiner knows, okay, yeah, so this was the first feature. It has been identified and explained and linked to the study, explained, and you, of course, have to link it to the study. Do not expect to get marks if you're not linking it to the plan that you're putting forward. Okay. Now, taking this ahead, I hope we through with part A and we through with part B. Moving on to the C part. Now, remember, this is linked to this, as I'd mentioned earlier. State 2 reasons for your choice of sampling technique. Now, of course, if you talk about sampling techniques, you all should be aware, as you studied in AS, there are 3 different sampling techniques that are part of your syllabus. To name them, you had random sampling, you had opportunity sampling, and you had, what is the third one? Volunteer sampling, also referred to as self-selecting sample. So of course, when you're designing or when you're planning an experiment, you would decide what particular research, what particular sampling technique would you want to use to be able to recruit your sample, right? Now, of course, when you let's just say choosing volunteer sample, there has to be a reason why you've chosen your volunteer sample, right? For in this case, let's just say if we're talking about trying to investigate the effectiveness of antipsychotics drugs to treat schizophrenia, for schizophrenic patients, you'd have to you might as well put up an advertisement in a clinic. You might as well uh, uh, use any form of advertisement that helps you identify schizophrenic patients, and then you and then they respond back to you. So if you're using a volunteer sample, you write down why you've used a volunteer sample. You might as well write down you've used a volunteer sample because you wanted to be sure that the people who participating in this study, they're actually schizophrenic patients. When you're using a volunteer sample, major advantage of volunteer sample is you could get hold of individuals with specific criteria. If you may recall the study by Baron Cohen that you did in AS, remember how they recruited autistic participants? They put up advertisements, right? So I'm not saying I'm not saying that you only use volunteer sampling, but if you're using volunteer sampling, you might as well be able to justify why you've used it. So they're asking you to state two reasons for your choice of sampling technique. You again divide this. For the first reason, you get the first mark. For the second reason, you get the second mark. As simple as it could be. Remember when I said you need to revise research methodology well, right? You need to have a very strong grip on research methodology because you're applying that research methodology over here while planning up a study. Number two, explain one strength of your choice of sampling technique. Now, whatever sampling technique you've chosen, you explain one strength. Remember, the word over here is state, the word over here is explain, right? Learn the difference, understand the difference, know the difference, right? Explain one strength of your choice of sampling technique. The sampling technique that you've used, you explain one strength. Now, let's just say you identify that strength and you explain it by linking it to this study, by linking it to your own planned study. The study that you've planned, you link it up with that. So, yeah. The third one, explain one reason for your choice of directional or non-directional hypothesis. There you go. Do you see how this is from here and how these two questions are from here? So, yeah, this is pretty much how these 24 marks are divided. Like I said earlier, these 24 marks, they divided into three parts. Part A worth 10 marks, part B worth 8 marks put together, part C worth 6 marks, these being put together, right? Now, being acclimatized with the type of questions or the type of sub questions you get, of course, gives you an upper edge. But remember, understanding these questions and then understanding how to attempt these questions is just a quarter of what needs to be done, right? Two-third two-third part over here is played by practice. The more you practice, the better you keep on getting at it. The more designing a study questions you attempt, the better you keep on getting at it. Now, taking this ahead, this is the marking scheme being published by the Cambridge from the Specimen paper. This was the question again. Schizophrenia can be treated biochemically with drugs such as antipsychotics, but they're not always effective. Plan an experiment to investigate the effectiveness of antipsychotic drugs to treat schizophrenia. Your plan must include details. It must include, focus on this word details, details on sampling technique and details on a directional or non-directional hypothesis. Use table A, that is AO2 application, to mark candidates' response to this question. We discussed this table A in a bit, do not worry. Credit both general features and specific features. What is the difference between general features and specific features? Specific features over here, my dear, would be related to an experiment, right? Here you go. specific features, right? However, what do we mean, or what does the examiner mean when he or she refers to general features? These are general features, general methodological features that you should be aware of, and you should be using. Of course, if you're planning a study, you have to mention the sampling technique, the demography of the sample. Now, in this particular question, it did specify that you need to give details on sampling technique, even if it was not present over here. Of course, if you're planning a study, you have to recruit a sample, and to be able to recruit a sample, you need to use a particular sampling technique, and you should be mentioning what sampling technique you're using. Okay, another tiny little thing that I'd like to add at this point. What happens in many what many students do is, let's just say they'd say a random sampling method was used. No, do not write a random sampling method is used. Specify how it is a random sample. Remind yourself that a random sample, that a random sample is a random sample only when every individual in the target population gets the same opportunity of being chosen as a sample, right? So you choose random sampling. Let's just say, okay, you choose random sampling, or you're able to use random sampling when you have a sampling frame. Now, what is a sampling frame? A sampling frame is a list of individuals in a particular target population. So whatever the target population is that you're conducting a research on, list of the names is the sampling frame. Until and unless you do not have a sampling frame, you cannot, you can call your sampling technique a random sampling technique, okay? One, so yeah, these are the general methodological features that need to be added in your plan study. The first one is sampling technique and the demographic of sample, the age, the gender, ethnicity, if you want to, so on and so forth. Number two, type of data collected. Are you collecting quantitative data, or are you collecting qualitative data, or are you using both? Now, I'd suggest at this point, try your level best to just use one particular type of data collection technique, right? Unless you have to use more than one. Now, why is it that I say this? What happens is, in many instances, in many cases, what students do is they use multiple data collection techniques. They'd be like, okay, so if it's an experiment, we would even if I specifically talk about this particular question from the specimen paper, there are many students who'd be like, oh, we'd use a questionnaire, or along with the questionnaire, we'd use an interviewing technique. We might as well observe the participants too. And when you ask students why they did this, they'd be like, oh, so we wanted to add we wanted to add to the credibility of the study. We wanted to improve the validity of the study. That's understandable. But do you realize the more data collection techniques you're using, the more data you'd eventually have to analyze? Data analysis is very important. You cannot simply use a lot of data collection techniques and then leave them midway. So whatever data collection technique you're using, you might as well be sure that you do specify what you plan on doing with that data. How do you plan on analyzing it, right? You might have to or you might have to operationalize a criteria for the data you've collected. So be ready to do all of that if you wanting to use more than one data collection technique. Taking this ahead, ethical guidelines to be followed while planning the study. So if you're conducting a study, make sure your study is meeting as many ethical guidelines as you possibly can. Do not harm participants. Do not physically or psychologically. Try not to deceive participants. In many instances, researchers do it, but try not to deceive your participants. If you have to deceive them, make sure you are debriefing them towards the end. Yeah, do not invade privacy, maintain confidentiality, do not disclose personal information about the participants, leave no trace for anyone to be able to identify the participants that you used in your study, so on and so forth. Next one, reliability of a research. Now, this is again important. I'd like to highlight this with green over here. If you want to score anywhere in the top band, that is level 5, that is between 9 to 10 marks. Make sure you have put up a plan that has a standardized procedure, because if you have a standardized procedure, it gets easier for you to replicate your study. If your study is replicable, that improves your chances of your study being reliable, right? So use controls if required. Try to keep your study standardized. The more standardized your study, your procedure is, the easier it would be to replicate, which would add on to the reliability of the research. And yes, this is a must if you want to score anywhere between 9 to 10 marks. No, I'm not saying this is the only thing that is required for anyone to be able to score 9 to 10 marks. Nonetheless, this is must. Taking it ahead, validity of research. Yes, there are different types of validity: concurrent validity, ecological validity. I'm sure everyone is aware of, but there's a lot more than that as well, from phase validity to concurrent validity to uh, internal validity, so on and so forth. Try to design a study or try to put up a plan that is high in terms of internal validity. And towards the end, data analysis. Now, this data analysis, this word data analysis, I've seen students worry about this data analysis part, and I'm seeing this since years, more than a decade now. It's simple. When they use the term data analysis, they're not asking you to do any mathematical calculation. This is a psychology paper, not a mathematics paper. When we use the word data analysis, if I may put it in a simpler manner, what the examiner expects from you is to the examiner expects from you to write down what you plan on doing with the data you've collected, to be able to investigate in this study, because you were asked to investigate, right? Whatever the method is that you're using for data collection, just make sure that the data that you do not forget, make sure that you do not forget to write down how you plan on using that data. For instance, if it's a questionnaire, if you're collecting data through a questionnaire, you write down how do you think collecting data from that questionnaire would eventually help you with that investigation, right? So yeah, that being there, I think we're done with this part. So these were the general features. It took longer than I expected it to, but I hope it helped. And then specific features, these were the specific features. I had mentioned these as well. Major features, or you might as well refer to them as specific features. For research methods, here you go. Taking it ahead. So the specific features of the plan should include, oh, because this is an experiment, here you are. This is what I was telling you guys as well. So they're asking you to write down about the type of experiment you're using. Be very clear about your independent variable, dependent variable, operationalize them. That would be better. Specify what controls you're using, and also write down about the choice, about the experimental design you've used. Now, the plan must include sampling technique and a hypothesis. The sampling technique should be appropriate to the plan. The hypothesis should be directional, that is one-tailed, or non-directional, that is two-tailed. A null hypothesis is not required, right? The examiner was specific over here, so you do not expect to get marks if you end up mentioning the null hypothesis. Credit other elements of the plan as appropriate using the marking grid. Now, this is the, where's the marking grid? Okay, yeah. So this is the marking grid. We would be discussing this marking grid in a bit, okay? Once we're done with what we're doing right now. So we're done discussing this first part, worth 10 marks. This part we've already discussed. For one piece of psychological knowledge on which your plan is based, describe the psychological knowledge. Again, this expects, I mean, to be able to do this, you need to know your syllabus content real well, right? Now, see, this section is worth 24 marks. Of course, if you want to score 24 on 24, you might as well prepare accordingly. You can't just read through your syllabus once and not practice these questions and then expect to be scoring well. So of course, if you want to score in the top band and the top level marks, you need to put in efforts accordingly. Now, taking this ahead, moving on to the C part. State two reasons for your choice of sampling technique. Two reasons for the choice of your sampling technique. Two reasons are required. Award 1 mark for each reason. This is something I had explained to you a while back too. So answers may include random sample was chosen to, so everyone in the target population has equal chance of participating. See, this is what I had mentioned too. Self-selecting sample, so participants can volunteer or not to participate. An opportunity sample was not chosen to avoid researcher bias when selecting the participants. So other appropriate answers can also receive credit. Again, this is it's on your discretion what you want to use. Now, explain one strength of your choice of sampling technique. They're asking you to explain one strength. Okay, one strength, this is worth 2 marks. So they're expecting you to give in details, right? So strength is given and applied to the plan. Like I said, you identify it and then you apply it to the plan. For example, use of randomized control trial eliminates researcher bias, allocating participants to either the antipsychotic group or control group. Now, over here, this is the identification part, and this is the, I'll just pick up another color. So this is the allocation part. Oh, that turned into a circle. We'll try it again. So yeah, doesn't work. Okay, so this is the second part. Allocating participants, this one, allocating participants to either the antipsychotic groups or control group randomly. So this is how you ensure that you're not missing on a single mark. The third one, explain one reason for your choice of directional or non-directional hypothesis. So remember, my dear, when I had said before you even attempt this question, make sure that you're reading through both of the reading through questions from both of the specialist options that you've studied. So like I teach clinical psych and health psych, I'd advise you all to read through questions from here and through questions from here, especially the B part, right? Especially the two specified features in the A part, right? Now, explain one reason for your choice of directional or non-directional hypothesis. Award 2 marks if an appropriate reason is given and justified. So you give an appropriate reason and you justify it. That is how you get these 2 marks from here. So you get the first mark for giving an appropriate reason and you get the second mark for justifying it. However, award 1 mark if appropriate reason is given and not justified. Now, what do we mean when, what does the examiner mean when he or she uses the word justify over here? So a directional hypothesis was chosen because it predicts the direction of the results. In this case, it is predicted that antipsychotics will be effective when compared to control group. This, I'll just pick up another color. Look at how the examiner has given marks here. The first mark and then, or rather from here in this case. So from here to here, this is you providing an appropriate reason, right? However, from here onwards to this part, this is where you're justifying. Oh, the examiner has mentioned it too. So yeah, this is pretty much about the designing. We still have the marking grid to discuss another 10 minutes. So this is the designing a study question, the infamous designing a study question that many students I see being worried about. Now, before we end this, I'd like to quickly discuss this generic level of response marking grid. Generic level, okay, so this is applicable for any question. Now, this you see is divided into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? I'm leaving this here so that you could pause this video, read through them all. However, to be able to explain this part to you, I have put it in an easier manner over here. So I just use this part to explain it to you. So yeah, How to write a level 5, that is 9 to 10 mark answer. 5 points that I want you all to keep in mind. Number one, use an appropriate method as required by the question. Of course, I mean, this is about level 5, but if you want to score anywhere from level 2, 3, or 4, you need to make sure that you're using an appropriate method, the method that has been required by the question. And based on the question that we discussed, the examiner expected you to plan up an experiment. Now, taking this ahead, describe good range of appropriate method, good range of appropriate method specific features. Now, what does it mean? What does the examiner mean when he or she refers to method specific features? Remember when I had said for every research method, try learning at least 3 to 4 specific characteristics, like for an experiment, IV, DV, uh, the type of experiment, the controls you're using, the experimental design, so on and so forth. So I'll just remove this from here so that you guys don't get confused. Okay, now describe good range of appropriate method specific features with accurate details, right? Accuracy, right? To be able to score a 9 on 10. Accuracy is a must, right? The details you've provided are accurate. What does it mean when the examiner uses the word accurate? I mean, don't make mistakes. Don't, let's just say, uh, don't expect the examiner to mark you in the top band if you've made any sort of mistake while using those specific uh, method specific features of that research method. Now, taking it ahead, the third point, good range of appropriate general methodological features. Now, my dear, we have discussed method specific features and we have discussed general methodological features both, and I've explained you the difference between them, right? These are the method specific features. Wait, let me show them to you. These are method specific features, right? And these are general features. Right, now taking this ahead, where was I? Now show very good understanding of your syllabus content. I repeat, very good. Third time, very good. Again, very good, right? So show very good understanding of the syllabus content along with research methods, and the study that you have planned should be coherent or should be logical or should be based on rationality and should be replicable. Remember, I'd mentioned this earlier as well. How do you make your study replicable? You make it replicable only when your procedure is standardized. Number 5, clearly apply. Clarity, clarity, clarity. Do not write something in a vague manner and then assume that the examiner would be able to read what you have in your mind. Make sure that you're clear enough. Remember, my dear, you get marked on what is written on the script. The examiner cannot read what you have in your mind. You would get marks based on what you've written on the script, right? So clearly apply knowledge of psychological methodology and terminology that has been involved in the study. Now, these 5 features, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I've just highlighted them over here, but they're exactly the same if you have a look at the marking grid that the examiner has published, right? So and one more thing I'd advise you to do. You know what? There are many students who'd come up asking, hey, why did I score an 8 and not a 9? For this, I'd want you all to understand what the difference is over here. See, this says, I'm just picking one point. I'd advise you all, I'd strongly rather advise you all to read through all of it, right? So, like this says, describe a good range of appropriate method specific features. Now, describes a range of, do you see this word good? Now, the third one, describes a range of appropriate method specific features, although they may lack detail. Now, do you see the difference here? Accurate detail versus some in detail versus may lack detail, right? Now, over here, identifies some appropriate method specific features. You just identifying them. You are expected to provide details, right? I just picked one point, right? I'd strongly advise if you're someone who is looking forward towards scoring anywhere between 9 to 10 marks, make sure you read all four of these clearly, thoroughly, read them thoroughly and compare them, right? I could do that, but that would take a lot longer. It's all in front of you. It's very simple. I'll just pick up another point to show you. Describes a good range of general features with some detail. I'd rather take the third. That's the fourth one. Shows very good understanding and the plan is coherent and is sufficient for replication. Shows very good understanding. The plan is coherent, but see the replication part, it's missing here, right? If you've done everything perfectly, you haven't specifically mentioned that your procedure is standardized and show that your procedure is standardized. There are many students who just write down, oh, the procedure is standardized. You might as well show, remember internal validity. The third shows limited understanding and the plan has some coherence, right? It should be coherent, logical, rational, right? Very good understanding, limited understanding. Look at what is making. I mean, you know what, if you spend 10-15 minutes on this, if this is available on the Cambridge website, I could share this with you. Take a print out of this and you wouldn't need anyone. You wouldn't need anyone to check your answer. You could check your answer yourself. You could all you need to do is be honest to yourself, and trust me, you'd understand this super well. Now, the fourth one shows little understanding and the plan would be difficult or impossible to replicate. Now look at the differences. Compare the yellow highlighted part with the yellow highlighted part, the green highlighted part with the green highlighted part, and see, this is how you keep on getting your marks. This is level 4 answer, level 5 answer, level 4 answer, level 3 answer, level 2 answer. I have level 1 answer details too, just in case if you'd want to give this a read. So yeah, this is pretty much it. And yeah, remember what I'd said initially. You need to practice this. One, you need to understand this. You might as well pause this video, rewind or repeat or replay, as you call it, this video. Take notes while you watch this. If you haven't as well, you might as well watch this again and take notes. Write down what you think you need to keep in mind to be able to score well. Once you've understood it well, then all you need to do is practice. Your first answer might not be your best answer, but to be able to get to your best answer, you need to get started with the first one. The next thing, another frequently asked question is, how much time do I give to the 10-mark planning and study question? For A-level psychology, syllabus code 9990, it's very simple. Your paper is of 60 marks and you get an hour and 30 minutes. That makes it 90 minutes in total. It's simple calculation, 60 minutes, 60 marks for 90 minutes. That makes it 1.5 minutes per mark. For this entire section, you shouldn't be spending anything more than 36 minutes, right? Make sure you are, make sure you're practicing it well. Make sure you're practicing it while keeping a check on time, because what you might what you shouldn't what you do what you should be cautious about at this point additionally also is, what, many students, uh, they'd score super well, or they'd want to score super well with this question, but while doing this, then they're not really left with a lot of time to be able to do this one, right? So for the C part, remember, this is a 6-mark question, so you should be you should be having 9 minutes on you to be able to do this, right? And yeah, this is pretty much it. It took longer than I thought it would. I hope this was helpful. And I'd like to reiterate, understand this well and then practice. The more you put your pen to paper, the better you'd keep on getting at it. You'd feel less confident when you're attempting the first question. You'd keep on getting better by the time you practicing your 10th question. So yeah, this is pretty much it. Take good care of yourself. Stay happy, healthy, safe, and protected. Stay humble, spread positivity, spread smiles, and Allah Hafiz.